Today we're going to be talking about how much you should charge your customer per hour. Let's dive into it. For this example, we're going to oversimplify some things. We're not going to get into taxes, deductions, or calculating your labor burden. Those would be important things in a real world example, but if you understand the basics of figuring out how much you should charge your customer, the rest will actually come pretty easy. Okay, there's going to be 4 main factors that go into determining how much you should charge. And so those are going to be, number 1, how many billable hours you work per week. And that'll affect how many billable hours you work per month and ultimately per year. Next is your labor cost. Do you have W-2 employees? Do you sub out your work? Do you do your work yourself? For this example, we're going to focus on that last one. So this assumes that maybe you're an electrician, a plumber, an HVAC guy, a drywaller, a painter, someone who's self-employed, you're a sole proprietor, and you do most of or maybe all of your work in-house yourself. You don't have any employees, you don't use any subs. 3 is going to be your overhead cost. So this is going to be things like software, maintenance on vehicles, insurance is a big one. Anything essentially that isn't part of your cost of goods sold, which for most contractors, your cost of goods sold is going to be your labor and your materials. Okay, and your profit is going to be number 4. I would say a good net profit margin to aim for is going to be 15%. And that's what we'll use for this example. Okay, so let's work through how you use these factors to understand how much money you need to charge your customers per hour. So the first one is how many billable hours do you work per week? If you're an owner or operator, you're likely not working 40 billable hours. Think about it. You spend time writing estimates, going on sales calls, dropping checks off at the bank, organizing your trailer. All of those tasks take time that is not billed to a customer. In my own business, I don't know. I think I've calculated sometimes I work like 10 billable hours a week, and then a lot of other hours are spent doing things like sales, working on our website, networking with people. And all that is important. All of it goes into running your own business. You want to factor that in as you're figuring out how much you should charge your customer. So realistically, let's say that you work 30 to 35 hours a week in billable hours. So these would be hours that you are actually billing your customer for. Next, we want to determine your labor cost. So again, for this example, we're going to assume that you do all the work yourself. You're a sole proprietor and you're the only person that you have to pay. Now, the way that we want to break this up is going to depend on a number of things like your experience, how skilled you are. So I think a good way to go about it is to figure out, okay, if I was hiring someone who had my experience, they had my skill, how much would I pay that person? And so let's say that you decide, okay, if I was hiring someone who had the same skill and experience as myself, I'd pay them $40 an hour. So that'll be your labor costs. Now, again, in the real world, if you had employees, you would want to figure out what your labor burden would be. So you would want to calculate things like taxes, insurance, workers' comp, that sort of thing. And you would want to add that to this $40 an hour number. So in the real world, if you were paying an employee $40 an hour, you would probably have a labor burden of somewhere between $50 and $55 an hour. In this case, you're a sole proprietor, you're doing all the work yourself, so you don't have to worry about workers' comp and payroll taxes and that sort of thing. Well, maybe you do have to worry about those things. Check with your local state government and what they require. I'm in Colorado. In Colorado, if you're a sole proprietor, you don't have to have workers' comp unless you have W-2 employees. Okay, so let's say that's $40 an hour. For this scenario, let's assume that you're working 50 weeks out of the year, you're taking 2 weeks off. Hopefully, you do that. And so, if that's the case, you're going to have 1,750 billable hours that you work every year times $40 an hour, and you're going to get $70,000 per year. So that's how much you're paying yourself. So next we can get into calculating your overhead cost. So you'll want to add up, any costs like insurance, vehicle maintenance, software, advertising, your CPA if you have one, and basically anything that doesn't fall into that category of labor or materials, your cost of goods sold. For our scenario, let's imagine that our overhead is $3,000 per month. That will come out to $36,000 per year. So if we add our labor burden and our overhead, what we're going to find is that you need to make $106,000 per year to cover your own labor and overhead. Now, this doesn't include any profit, and likely we want to include profit, so let's figure that out too. So let's imagine that the profit that you're shooting for is 15% profit at the end of the year. To figure out how much revenue we need, we will perform the following calculations. So we'll take revenue, which is going to equal first the number that we have here, if we add up our labor and our overhead cost, so $106,000, and we're going to divide that by 100% minus 15%. That's our desired profit margin. And if we perform that, we're going to get about $124,706 per year. So that's how much that we need to make per year if we want to have a 15% profit margin on top of paying for our overhead and our labor. And so if you were to work this out, what that means is that at the end of the year, the profit that you would make would be $18,706. Again, in this scenario, we're not considering taxes, deductions, etc. Okay, so how does all of this help us figure out our billable rate to our customer? All right, let's put this all off to the side, and we'll get into our billable rate. So we need to figure out, if we want to hit this goal of $124,706, how much do we need to charge our customer per hour? For this, we're going to use a really simple formula. We're going to take our labor rate, which in this case is $40, and we're going to divide that by 100% minus our overhead percent, which is something that we need to calculate. We did all the work here to get our overhead number, so our overhead percentage is going to be what percent of our total revenue is overhead. So our overhead is going to equal 36,000 divided by 124,000, and if we perform that, we're going to get about 29%. And so if we subtract our overhead percent and our desired profit margin, which in this case is 15%, we're going to find that in order to hit that goal, we need to charge $71.43 per hour. So that's our labor rate. That's what you need to be charging your customer if you want to be able to pay yourself $70,000 a year and cover $36,000 of overhead and have a net profit of $18,706. So that's what that looks like. I hope you learned something from this video. If you'd like to see more content like this, like and subscribe.